Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and today I'm going to be telling you all of the books that I read this fall. For the purposes of this video, fall is going to include the 3 months of September, October, and November. As you may or may not know, having followed this channel for a little while, or perhaps you follow me on other forms of my bookish social media, I've been in a bit of a reading slump that sort of spanned the duration of those 3 months. It was kind of bad around about September, but October is when it really set in and I wasn't able to shake it really all that well during November. So the list of books I'm going to show you is a little bit sparse, but nevertheless, I have read a good number of books and I'm very excited to share with you what I thought of them today. So without further ado, I think it's best if we just get started. By far, September was the month this season that I read the most books. I ended up reading a total of 12 books, starting with They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This book follows two teenage boys, Rufus and Mateo, who have both been called by a company known as Deathcast to be told that they are going to die within the next 24 hours. The two of them make friends via the Last Friend app and spend their last day together doing all of the things on their mini bucket lists and grow incredibly close. So as far as things I like about the book, I think that Adam Silvera writes character incredibly well. He knows how to give you just enough backstory that you're invested in the lives of the people you're following, but also withhold enough that they have some secrets from you. In books like this, which are, at least in my eyes, a little bit more character studies than anything else, I do like when the main character has some secrets from you, the reader, that you get to uncover as the character / often narrator learns to trust you a little more and becomes a little more open about telling you that part of the story. As far as things I didn't like, I think my problem with it is just the premise overall, the idea that two complete strangers would just so quickly develop as big a bond as Rufus and Mateo did. Granted, I've never been in a sort of life or death scenario that they were in, so I don't know how that would work to heighten any emotions, but I did feel that perhaps their relationship with one another progressed a little too fast, that the trust between them just sort of spouted maybe a little too quickly, especially for one of the characters who tends to be more timid. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed They Both Die at the End and I ended up giving it 4 stars. The next thing that I read in September was Nevernight, and later in the month I read its sequel, God's Grave, both by, obviously, Jay Kristoff. To avoid spoiling anything for later books in the series, I'm really only going to be giving a brief synopsis of Nevernight. Though really, as it's one of BookTube's faves and there's a YouTube miniseries show of the first book coming out now, I'm not sure that I have to. Basically, Nevernight follows Mia Corvair, a former noblewoman's daughter turned kind of street rat assassin who, after finishing learning some easy tricks on the streets of her city, ends up going to proper assassin school where she wants to go so that eventually she can avenge the unlawful, in her eyes, murder of her father and imprisonment of her mother and younger brother. But of course, as is often the case with Jay Kristoff books, things aren't exactly as Mia thinks they are at the very beginning, and shit goes awry very, very quickly. So when I was thinking about things I like, my mind immediately jumped to characters because I think Mia's motivations are very well fleshed out, and I do love when you can trust the protagonist to do and act in ways that their previous experience and their previous actions sort of feed into and make sense. But what I really, really love about the Nevernight world is the world itself, the world building. I think Jay Kristoff has crafted an incredible, very, very interesting adult fantasy world. I love getting to travel with Mia. I love learning about the lore of the world that she lives in. I love learning about the religion. It's just so nicely peppered in. It never feels info dumpy. It all feels like an organic part of the story. And I know some people disagree with that very strongly because of all of the little footnotes, but I found them really charming and actually not intrusive on the storytelling at all. And maybe I'm just remembering them with some rose-tinted glasses on, but I can't remember anything I didn't like about either of these stories particularly. I really didn't see the direction that the story was going to take when God's Grave happened, but I kind of like where it went anyway, and I ended up giving both of these books 5 stars. After that, I continued with my Jay Kristoff kick by picking up Gemina, and later in the season I picked up Obsidio, which are books 2 and 3 of the Illuminae Files by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. Again, both Gemina and Obsidio are sort of sequels. Gemina doesn't exactly follow directly from Illuminae. In fact, it is a sort of companion book as the events happen concurrently. But Obsidio is, despite adding in 2 new characters, very much a conclusion to the whole trilogy and wraps everything up together. So I'm a little hesitant of saying what happened in either book because it does spoil the first just a little bit. But the basic premise is, of the series as a whole, it is super late in the future. We have a bunch of mega corporations that have taken over everything, and one of these mega corporations basically committed bioterrorism on a group of citizens that were part of an illegal mining colony on a planet far from here. Either the people in the colony or people at like a jump way station a little ways away that the colonists are trying to get to escape with their lives are all sort of being liquidated by the company that did the bio attack. And the Illuminae files are, in theory, a series of files and video clips, etc., that a bunch of WikiLeaks type people have compiled together to sort of make sure that this corporation can't just sweep their crimes under the rug and pretend what they did never happened. I'm sorry for saying it like that. I can't just summarize the first book because it doesn't give you a good idea of what happened in books 2 and 3, but basically, for the series as a whole, as far as things I liked, it was really interesting between the books finding the threads of like character relationships that tied all of the stories together and sort of made the end where they all came together make more sense because they had previously established relationships along the way. I also liked that no one couple pairing, because each book follows a different one, was the main one. I would argue that the ones in Illuminae and Gemina took precedence over the one in Obsidio. I'm not sure that there needed to be one in Obsidio, and it could have just been the concluding story of the ones from Illuminae and Gemina, because I think they didn't really have enough room on page to develop as well. I guess it's the thing I didn't like. About Obsidio specifically, I didn't like the way that a couple sort of felt shoehorned in there. I don't think they had enough room to develop as characters as well as they did in books 1 and 2. But in books 1 and 2, I really loved the characterization. I loved that they all kind of stood on their own and weren't really compared to one another. They each had their own distinct assets that they could bring to the table and disadvantages that sort of held them back. And I also just really liked there was a happy ending. We don't get enough happy endings. I'm glad that we got like a wish fulfillment-y story where everyone lived. I mean, not everyone lives. A lot of people die, but the people you root for don't bite it, which, thank you, Jay. After Nevernight, I needed him to not just kill my face. I really liked the series overall. I ended up giving Gemini a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and ended up giving Obsidio my lowest rating, I think, for the books overall, which is a 3.75. Still pretty high, just it wasn't my fave of the series. Following that, I had to get back on my fantasy game, you know me. So I read The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. This is a series of short stories from Leigh Bardugo's Grishaverse. There is a total, oh my god, it's signed. Nice. There is a total of 6 stories following the mythologies and storytelling practices of 4 of the nations that Leigh created in her Grishaverse. And what this is dark reimaginings of fairy tales that we might be familiar with, but with a very distinctly Grisha spin to all of them. There's an author's note in the back of this where Leigh explains that as a child, when she heard fairy tales, she was always a little bit like iffy about the fact that, like, for example, Hansel and Gretel went back to their father, who was totally fine with their stepmom just abandoning them in the woods. Like, he allowed them to be abused for many, many years without doing anything. So why would they go back to him? Or, you know, in The Little Mermaid, why does she have to give up her voice for a boy? Which I personally believe is a misreading of The Little Mermaid tale by a long shot, but whatever. It's a take that many people have for it, and I'm allowing everyone to have their own distinct views of a story. It's just not what mine is. But I understand if somebody has that view of the story, why they would take offense to it. And Leigh just reimagines them within the context of the world she has, or rather I should say worlds, because each one has its own distinct feeling and flavor based on what part of her world she imagined the story from. As far as things I liked, I really like how they draw on both the canon of our contemporary earthly fairy tales while blending them very much with the world that she has created. And there's nothing about them I don't like. I think they're beautiful stories. I think the build of this book is beautiful. It's stunningly embossed. The feeling of it is very matte and beautiful. The stories themselves are illustrated, and illustrations get bigger and bigger as you get more and more of the story, which I just think is thematically lovely, and it's just beautiful to look at. And I don't think it should come as a surprise that I gave it a full 5 out of 5 stars. I'll be reading this again and again and again and again and again. Probably in the winter months, because they just feel very wintry, a lot of the stories. Perfect for sitting around in a cozy little blanket and getting a little spooked, but very mystified. After this, I read, I think, one of the most harrowing books that I will ever read, and that is Girl at War by Sarah Novich. I buddy read this book with my friend Katie from the channel A Sea of Tomes, who I'll have linked in the description box below, and she is far more eloquent than I could ever be, I think, when talking about this book, so definitely check out her review of it. Girl at War follows Ana Juric, a Croatian girl who is 10 years old, right at the brink of the Yugoslavian Civil War. Ana and her family live a fairly carefree life up until the break of the war, but eventually the ethnic conflicts lead to the murder of Anna's family, and she's eventually taken to the United States and adopted as a refugee. The story flips back and forth between Anna as a child in Croatia and Anna as an adult in New York, coming to terms with what happened to her as a child. As the story moves forward, we learn that Anna was a child soldier conscripted to basically fight and prevent the genocide of the Croatian people. I'm not going to talk about what I liked and didn't in this book because it's not my place. I'm not sure it's anyone's place except for the people who were there and it happened to. In case you are not aware, I am Croatian. I'm a first-generation immigrant to the United States. I was born there. Can't be US president, but I feel very distinctly connected to this story in a way that perhaps I don't to some others. So I'm not going to talk about my likes and dislikes because as a story, I feel like as difficult as it was to read, it's a story that needs to be told. There is no winner in a war, and I think Girl at War demonstrates that beautifully. So following that apocalypse story, I read another one. It's called Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. This novel follows Maggie Hosky, a Dinetah woman who, post what's essentially a climate apocalypse, develops powers based on her tribal heritage. Developing powers is basically how people of Navajo descent survived this climate apocalypse. They built a wall to keep the rising sea out, and what they do is they hunt the monsters that develop on their land. Maggie is a bit of a lone wolf because her tribal powers are seen as dangerous and kind of monstrous, but she's called upon because her skills are good and people are really willing to do whatever it takes to get rid of these monsters. On a mission to save a young girl that was snatched from a village, Maggie finds out something about the monsters that changes sort of everything she thought she knew about the world and sends her off on an adventure. There's not much that I don't actually like about the story. I think the world building is really cool. It's apocalypse in the sense that Western audience will understand it, in that the Western world is completely kaput. It's done. It's gone. But it's also like Apocalypse 2.0 for the Navajo people, because if you think about it, Apocalypse 1.0 began the moment Christopher Columbus completely screwed the pooch on finding a Western passage. But I really, really love the aesthetics of this story. You know, desert landscape, crumbling wastelands of technology, magic coming in and shaking things up and not really being a force for good or evil, but a force for change. All of that I think is really cool. Likewise, Maggie's storyline is particularly compelling to me because she is very clearly a woman who has suffered a great deal of emotional abuse. She has, in addition to like transgenerational trauma to deal with, she has her own personal traumas that she's working through, and I loved seeing her kind of begin to come through them at the end of this book and come out stronger at the end. As far as things I didn't like, it took me a little while to get into this story. I'm normally okay with just being dropped headfirst into fantasy, but Maggie was, I think, a difficult character to get in the headspace of just because of the way she is. She's a very angry and secretive young woman, and as much as I like those characters, they can be a slow start for some people, apparently including myself. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed Trail of Lightning. I'm very excited to continue with the series, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars out of 5. After that, I read book 3 of the Iron Fae series by Julie Kagawa, The Iron Queen. This series follows Megan Chase, a girl in Louisiana who thinks she is completely normal besides being severely unpopular at school, discovering that she in fact has Fae heritage and is the pseudo-heir. She's kind of a bastard. Oberon didn't mean to sire her. Of the Seelie court in the land of Fairy, and being half human, she is immune to iron magic, which is a problem that the fairy peoples are struggling with because iron is poison to them, and she's basically the only one that can save them. As far as things I like about the series, it's book candy. It was a super quick, easy, addicting read with all of your favorite like YA fantasy tropes. We got a chosen one, we got a love triangle, we got scary fairies that aren't really scary when you see how powerful the chosen one is, and we get a happily ever after. It's fun, it's easy to read, and it's primarily a happy story. I don't really have anything I didn't like, because to dislike something you have to feel a little stronger for it, and I have to say that for this series I didn't feel overly strong at all. It was a pretty meh series, a lot of fun, pretty nostalgic because I do remember reading them in my youth and liking them a little bit more. But this read through, I was just a little bit nonplussed. I was happy to finally get to the concluding book of the series because I hadn't originally read that one before, so it felt good to have some closure for it. But overall, I gave the Iron Queen 2.75 stars, and I don't think I gave either of the previous ones above a 3. So I read them. That's kind of all I have to say. I followed that up by beginning a reread of a series that's one of my favorites by reading The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, and later in the coming season, I finished the rest of the cycle. I was rereading these books in anticipation of Maggie Stiefvater's new spin-off trilogy called Down the Hawk, following Ronan Lynch and Adam Parrish, 2 of the aforementioned Raven Boys. This book series is notoriously difficult to talk about and give a synopsis for, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. The Raven cycle sort of follows Blue Sargent, the daughter of a house of Virginia psychics, as she befriends a group of students from Agliambia Academy, which is just a bunch of privileged white boys mostly. I don't think I can say it better than that. That's gonna be my best shot. There's not much I don't love about the series, what from nostalgia, what from the actual quality of it. Maggie Stiefvater's strength, I think, lies in worlds that feel right on the borderline of magical realism and fantasy. And I just think it's very masterfully done. You believe her world, and you also believe, at least I do, her characters. All of them feel very distinct. They all have their own motivations, and sometimes those motivations clash. And it's in those clashings, I think, that the best parts of the Raven cycle exist. As far as things I didn't like, the ending of the series felt a little bit odd to me. I think perhaps a 5th book would have been really, really good. And then there could be like a book kind of centering each of our boys and also Blue, which I think would have only been fair. But I do think it was a very satisfying conclusion. I cry like a baby every single time I reach the end of it, and I always want to read it again. So I guess you can't really say I dislike any of it. Overall, I give the series 5 out of 5 stars. Some books I like a little more, some books I like a little less. My ranking of them changes literally day in, day out, so I'm not going to even attempt to do that here. But just know that it is one of the series of my hearts, and I can't wait to get to Call Down the Hawk, which is currently holding up Trail of Lightning so it doesn't attack me again. After that, I read The Heart of Betrayal, Book 2 of the Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. It is very difficult to talk about this book without spoiling what is a major plot twist and kind of selling point of Book 1, The Kiss of Deception. I'm gonna give it the vaguest synopsis I possibly can. In Book 1, you follow a princess who runs away from her sort of misogynist and misguided kingdom, where she will soon be forced to marry a prince because she doesn't want the responsibility of basically being the link that forges the most tenuous alliance in the world. She is followed and found, actually though, by that prince, and she's also followed and found by a would-be assassin who has been sent by a third rivaling kingdom to kill her to end the possibility of an alliance so that the two kingdoms that would have been allied can't stand against the might of the third kingdom, which is planning a large-scale attack. You get three perspectives in this book. The princess is herself, Leah, but you also get the assassin and the prince. Trick is, you don't know who the assassin and the prince are until the end of the book. So as far as things I like about the series so far, I really like Leah. I like the way that she makes decisions. She's actually got a pretty strong head on her shoulders. I know YA protagonists get a lot of flack for acting like teenagers, but I think Leah's behavior makes a lot of sense, both because she's a teenager, but more importantly because she was raised royal. She knows political intrigue and she knows strategy, and those guide her, I think, more than her raging teenage hormones do. She's also just so kind, and I love her relationships with her friends and family. The tropes come on a little too strong sometimes. I still really like the series. I understand why a lot of people won't. I'm looking at it as a product of its time, so like the earlier 2010s fantasy YA, and it's pretty clear that it was the basis for some future YA stories. So I'm not going to say it's cliche and overdone, because I mean, if you're the one that started it, is it cliche? If you've invented the cliche? I don't know. Overall though, I really liked the book. The second one, I think, suffered a little bit from second book syndrome, but I still really enjoyed it and ended up giving it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. The next book I finished, and I say finished because I'd been literally reading it from the very beginning of the month, like 3 chapters a day to get to the end of it. With that description, I'm sure you already know what it is, but the next book I finished is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I'm not really sure how to describe The Priory of the Orange Tree, not because it's as weird as the Raven Cycle, mostly just because there's so much that happens in it. I don't know which storyline to prioritize. It is a sweeping epic tale. Still talking about her. I can't hold her. She's so fucking heavy. The Eastern world and the Western one have been split by the disease that the Western dragons carry, differences in religion, and differences in politics for about 1,000 years. In the West, on the Isle of Inish, the Bethernet line rules. It is a line of queens passed down from the first being the queen that, according to their religion, was the one that slayed the great nameless one, which was the old Western dragon that caused a plague and tried to destroy the entire world and bring it under his dominion. The latest of the line is a queen named Sabrin, who is being pressured on all sides to have a child to continue the line. In the West, we also follow Idurian, who is a spy who you find out later has been sent there to keep Sabrin alive, just in case she really is a descendant of this person, because according to Eve's religion, that's the person who is like the founder of her religion. And in the East, we follow Tane, a dragon rider who has, God, so many secrets. There's nothing I can say that's not going to spoil part of the story. I'm going to stop right here. As far as things I like, all of it. It is a sprawling, beautifully constructed epic fantasy standalone. Honestly, could have been a gazillion books, each that length, and I still would have read them all. But as it is right now, the entire story is contained in those like 800 something pages, and I think it's very masterfully done. The world building is great. The characters all make sense and are beautiful and wrench your heart whenever you read them. You'll have favorites. You'll have favorites in the sense that you love to hate them. They're all kind of amazing. As far as things I didn't like, I wish that we focused a little bit more on the lore of the East. I think it was a pretty Western heavy story, despite in theory being about a balance between the two being necessary to sort of defeat this nameless evil. But overall, really enjoyed the story and ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. And with that, I believe we close out the month of September. So in order, in September, I read They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera, Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, Gemina by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, The Language of Thorns by Lee Bardugo, Girl at War by Sarah Novich, Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Rowanhorse, The Iron Queen by Julie Kagawa, The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, God's Grave by Jay Kristoff, The Heart of Betrayal by Mary E. Pearson, The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater, leading to a total of 12 books. The rest of the months, not quite so full. October is when my slump really hit, and in an attempt to sort of break it, I reread not an old childhood favorite, but a spin-off of an old childhood favorite called Beyond the Spiderwick Chronicles by Holly Black and Tony DiTerlizzi. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Spiderwick Chronicles following the Grace siblings, and there was a movie about it with Freddie Highmore, I think, as the lead. Holly Black, I think, is better known for her other Fae stories, but this is where it started in the middle grade verse. Beyond the Spiderwick Chronicles is a trilogy, sort of spin-off continuation of these books. The premise stays kind of the same. Boy who doesn't want to believe in fairies is suddenly thrust into their world. They are scarier than he thinks they will be, and through a series of shenanigans, he ends up defeating them and saving the world and his family. It's really sweet. There's not much else I want to say about it because it is middle grade and Kappa terrifies me, so I'm going to put this down. I ended up giving all 3 of those books a 3.75 out of 5 stars overall. Following those, I shifted gears tremendously and I listened to the audiobook of Royally Matched, book 2 of the Royally series by Emma Chase. I was recommended these books by my friend Avery, who is an absolute romance queen, and I'll have her linked in the description box below if you want more romance recommendations. This is a series of companion books following 3 gentlemen who are related to the crown of an imaginary kingdom called Wesco and the women that they fall in love with. Royally Matched follows Prince Henry of Wesco, who after his brother's abdication is next in line for the throne. However, Henry is not quite ready for this sort of responsibility. He's used to partying and he thinks, well, what better way, since Grandma the Queen says I have to get married, to do this on my own terms than to have a sort of game show that'll distract from all the faux pas I'm going to probably make politically. So royal women from all over Europe, and especially all over Wesco, basically compete to gain the affections of our charming king. One lady, however, Miss Sarah Tightbottom, yeah, that's her name, very unfortunate. Sarah knows her sister's really only there to get herself started on acting gigs, but she's still going with her sister to sort of escape an uncomfortable situation at work and basically to make sure her sister remains happy and unhurt in what could turn into a catfighty place. Henry finds himself unwittingly more and more attracted to Sarah and wanting to spend more and more time with her despite what the rules of the TV show have to say, and their romance kind of blossoms from there. As far as things I like, again, this is a series of book candy. I think it's very sweet. I think Henry might be my favorite of the 3 love interests. He puts on this facade of this charming, flirty, happy boy, but really he is hurting very tremendously. He has trauma that he has to work to unpack, and work to unpack it he does. He never takes it out on Sarah or on anybody. He mostly internalizes his grief, but eventually through some serious internal study, he learns to fix himself and step up and show up, which I think is just like a really attractive trait. After competence, like being good at things, I think owning your own mistakes and growing up is one of the most attractive things. So I found him like very swoon-worthy personally. I also really liked Sarah. She was very sweet, very kind, but also like a very do no harm but take no shit kind of person. As far as things I didn't like, I do think the romance maybe moved a little bit quickly, and I do think the romance was sort of at the front seat of every other plot point, which I'm not too upset about because it is a romance book. However, I do believe that there were some topics in here that maybe should have been given a little bit more room, child abuse being one, and just misogyny being another. Those are things I think that if you're going to include in your story, you do need to give a little bit more room to breathe, and you do need to attack them with a little bit more nuance than I saw here. But overall, I really liked the story. I ended up giving it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. After Royally Matched, I read Obsidia, which I've already talked about. After that, I read Blue Lily Lily Blue, which also I've already sort of talked about. And following those 2 books, I read My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. This thriller follows a married couple. They live in a fancy neighborhood. They have 2 kids, a picket fence, you know, a most idyllic life from the outside looking in. But the way that they've kept their marriage alive is by planning, getting away with, and executing, not in that order obviously, the murder of young women. And the story sort of follows the fallout of that and the deterioration of their relationship as one of them cracks under pressure. As far as things I liked about My Lovely Wife, it was a very addicting read. I did, from start to finish, want to know what happened next. And I think with a thriller that's what you're looking for. As far as things I didn't like, it felt a little less like a thriller and more like a weird sort of character study. We don't really spend much time with the actual murders. We don't really spend much time with their planning or anything that the premise sort of promises on page. We get a couple flashbacks, but mostly we're dealing with like the emotional fallout that the husband is facing as one of the bodies is uncovered. I'm a little over the woman scorned trope, so there's not really much more that I want to say about this book. I gave it a 2.75 stars. I did think it was a fun story, very addicting. Like I said, I couldn't really put it down. I had to know what happened next, but I don't think that I would pick up another Samantha Downing book. And the next to last book that I read in the month of October, and the last one I'm going to talk about is, Vicious by V.E. Schwab, which is the first book to the Villains series, duology. I don't know how many of them there are going to be. But Villains follows Victor Vale, a man who has recently broken out of prison, who has a plan to kill his former college best friend, Eli Ever. Victor's planning to do this because Eli kind of got him unlawfully arrested after the two of them messed with some technology that turned the both of them into EOs, or extraordinary people. As far as things I like go, everything. I love the flipping back and forth between the past and the present so that we get both an understanding of Victor's motivations and an understanding of Eli as a character as well, but also a very climactic showdown that shows the two of them not as they were, but as they are now, as what they've sort of made themselves to be. As far as things I didn't like, honestly, I wish Victoria Schwab had made it gay. There was so much romantic subtext. Victor was clearly in love with Eli, and I think that it would have only deepened their rivalry and deepened the betrayal Victor felt after Eli did him dirty. But besides that, I really love the story. Can't wait to continue with the series, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And that closes out the month of October. Again, in October, I read 8 books. So start to finish, they are Beyond the Spiderwick Chronicles books 1 and 3, by 1 through 3, by Tona DiCerlizzi and Holly Black, Royally Matched by Emma Chase, Obsidio by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, Blue Lily, Lily Blue by Maggie Stiefvater, My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing, The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. That's basically a very, very short graphic novella following a little girl who is sort of entered into the world of tea dragon curation, and if you form a bond with them, they'll make tea for you, and when you drink the tea, it reminds you of all the memories you've had with the dragon. It's very sweet, very cute. It was the perfect thing to read in October. Loved it, 5 out of 5 stars. Vicious by Victoria Schwab, and The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. Moving on, homestretch, November. This was, I think, my worst reading month on file this year. I only read 7 books. I'm super tired, and I have D&D to get through after I finish filming this video, so I'm not going to be holding up and showing the covers anymore. Sorry about that. I also don't have as much to say about a lot of these books, so hopefully you won't hold this against me. The first book that I read in the month of November was What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and by Adam Silvera. You know what? I'll just show it like this. What If It's Us follows Ben and Arthur, 2 pre-college boys who have a meet cute while Arthur is on an internship in New York where Ben lives. Ben has just broken up with his ex-boyfriend, and Arthur is gay and looking for love and for someone to share his first kiss with, and he meets Ben and he thinks Ben is just the cutest. The problem is he doesn't ask for Ben's name. He doesn't know anything about him. So coupled with some girls from work, he sort of cyberstalks Ben, and Ben does the same for him, and somehow they find each other, and they have a lot of do-overs and a lot of firsts, and it's just a really sweet romance story between these 2 boys. As far as things I like, again, I think Adam Silvera is really good at character. I think that he sort of made this wild and unpredictable story very believable. That might have been Becky Albertalli's influence as well on the plot, sort of making all the threads tie together and everything kind of come together in a very cohesive and, I would say, compelling way. I didn't really want to put the book down. I did want to know how it would end, and I wanted to know, like, what if it is them? Like, will they end up together at the end of it? Because it's not very clear for most of the book. As far as things I didn't like, the reason I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars, like it's a very middle of the road book for me, is because I couldn't stand Arthur. He's so selfish. He's annoying. He's childish, not in the way a 17-year-old is childish, but in the way a 12-year-old is childish. It's very grating to read his perspective. I couldn't sympathize with him at all. I couldn't sympathize very much with Ben either, but I did sort of understand where he was coming from a lot more than Arthur. Arthur had, I think, way too high expectations from a practical stranger when they first met, and he just blew small things way out of proportion, took everything as a personal attack, and he was just impossible to read. Couldn't stand Arthur. Would not pick him up again. And as I said, I gave this book a 2.5 stars, which is a bummer because if it had perhaps a different secondary protagonist, I would have liked it a lot more because the idea of it was super sweet. I just think the execution, because of Arthur, did not work for me. The next book I read was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is another book where I don't think I really need to give a synopsis because it was on everybody's top books of 2019. But basically, the very, very short of it is that Alex, the first son of the United States in this alternate universe where we had a president that doesn't want us all to die, and the spare heir, Henry, have a rivalry, and due to a bunch of mix-ups and political shenanigans, have to sort of hang out with each other for PR purposes. During this hanging out, they find out that they are actually really close and they care for each other very dearly, and ultimately they fall in love and hijinks ensue. I feel like that really wasn't a fair synopsis because all of the things I like, including the very sweet romance, are actually not included in it. What I liked most about this is the history and the history of art and the political intrigue and just the everything not romantic about this book, I think might have been my favorite part, which isn't to say I didn't like the romance. It's just everything else was just done so well. This book is a love letter to what could have been and what could be after the 2020 elections. I think it's, in addition to being a very aspirational book, a very healing book, there's an aspect of it that sort of feels like a balm to the soul. After the past 3 years, I think we all needed a story like this to give us a break from the emotional turmoil that the political climate has put us all in. And I think Red, White, and Royal Blue does just that. And there's not much that I didn't like about this book. I gave it a full 5 out of 5 stars. I can't wait to read it again. I feel like there'll be something new to pick up on every single time I read it, and I'm just so excited and glad to have shared it again with my friend Katie. I've buddy read a lot with Katie in this past fall, and it's been a delightful time. You should definitely check her out. And as far as the rest of the books I read this month, there's either not much that I want to say or not much that I can say about them. After Red, White, and Royal Blue, I read Royally Endowed by Emma Chase. This is the third and final book of her Royally trilogy. It followed my least favorite couple of the three because I think that, like Obsidio, it tried to be not only its own story, but a conclusion to the previous 2 stories that came before it. And I think that because of that, we didn't really get as much characterization for the main couple. In addition, there were a lot of time jumps, so we didn't get to spend much time with them and watch them grow. For this reason, I gave this book 2.75 out of 5 stars. After that, I read The Problem of Susan and Other Stories by Neil Gaiman. It was an illustrated sort of graphic novelization of several short stories that Neil Gaiman has written. I liked some of them, but I'm a big lover of the Narnia books, and while I do think Susan was done terribly dirty, I do think that what he turned that story into is just sort of, it put a bad taste in my mouth. Like, don't create abuse where abuse wasn't, if you know what I mean. And while it's important, I don't think that the Susan narrative had to be the center of it. The stories themselves were pretty nice, and I ended up giving that collection a 3 out of 5 stars. After that, I beta read a book that a friend wrote, and I don't know if I'm at liberty to talk about it, and either way I wouldn't want to because I do know that she's pursuing publication, and I don't want to dampen her chances by getting it out there right now. The next to last book that I read was a reread of like a literally early childhood favorite, Flipped by Wendelin Van Dranen. Follows a boy and a girl approaching middle school. The boy is named Bryce, the girl is named Juliana, and in their early years, Juliana's a little bit weird and pursues Bryce in a way that makes him uncomfortable, and because of this, he gets this sort of image of her in his head as this creep that won't leave him alone, which, fair. But as time goes on and Bryce sort of gets to figure out more about Juliana and revises his initial impression of her and sort of pushes away his father's beliefs about Juliana and her family, he sees that she's like a really cool girl and he begins to fall for her. Juliana, on the other hand, who was completely in love with Bryce as a youth, realizes that he sort of seems to be only a pretty face and that he's kind of mean, and she changes her feelings about him as well. Their feelings for one another flip. Haha, get it? Because of the title? As far as things I like, I just think it's a very sweet story. It tackles a lot, and I appreciate middle grades that aren't afraid to talk to their readers as though they have the ability to form thoughts and opinions for themselves. It talks about the falling apart of not only childhood feelings, but also adult relationships, and how the parallels between the two are not things to be ignored. And there's not much that I didn't like about this book. It's a little bit juvenile. Sometimes I feel like the bigger topics of the book were sort of shoehorned in because there wasn't really a great way to tie them together. It was a very short book. I think maybe with an additional 50 pages, those things could have been expanded upon and would have therefore fit a little better. But again, it's for middle grade audiences, so maybe just the mention is enough. I ended up giving this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the final book that I want to talk to you guys about, the final book that I read in the month of November, is Lily and Duncan by Donna Gephardt. Lily and Duncan follows obviously the eponymous characters. Lily is a transgender girl who is trying to come out to a world that does not seem to want her to. Her mother and sister are like pretty supportive of her, but her father is giving some pushback. He's afraid for her physical and emotional safety, not realizing that he's actually putting the latter at a significant bit of harm. It also follows Duncan, a new boy in town who has bipolar disorder. Something about his memory is a little bit off, and he is struggling to fit in with the popular crowd despite their bullying of Lily, who he's actually made pretty okay friends with at the start. He's trying to figure out how he can avoid being bullied the way he was at his previous school, while also getting to stay friends with this girl who is just really, really cool and who seems to accept him for who he is despite everything else. Because of his attempt to get in sort of with the popular crowd, Duncan begins to play basketball, and he realizes that when he stops taking his medication, he seems to perform a little better at the sport, at least at first. So that's an issue that needs addressing. I find it very difficult to talk about this book because I liked so much of it. It was a beautiful, beautiful character sketch for two wonderful kids. Both Lily and Duncan's struggles feel very authentic and very painful to read about at times because they both go through such dramatic lows and incredible highs throughout the course of this story. There's not much that I don't like about this book besides the fact that it ends eventually and then you have to deal with the book hangover afterward. It's a very sweet story, and if you have a middle grade reader in your life who you would like to ensure grows up to be a more thoughtful, well-rounded person who doesn't judge people based on their first instincts, but sort of learns to get to know them, definitely let them read Lily and Duncan. You won't regret it. There's diversity in the world. Let your kids experience it. It's an excellent, excellent book. And that is my fall wrap-up. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos every weekend, more or less, and I would love for you to become part of my bookish family. Now I have to go get ready for D&D and pack all of my stuff up, so I really do have to go. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.